Carmine Lupertazzi Sr. is a significant character in The Sopranos, portrayed by actor Tony Lip. He's the head of the Lupertazzi crime family, one of the 5 families in New York, and one of the most powerful and influential mob bosses in the series. As the boss of the Lupertazzi family, Carmine Sr. is depicted as a traditional and old-school mobster with deep roots in organized crime. He is respected and feared within both his family and the broader criminal underworld. Carmine is generally portrayed as a calm, measured and dignified figure, in contrast to some of the more hot-headed characters in the series. He has a somewhat paternal approach to leadership, often seen as wise and strategic in his decisions. However, like many in his line of work, he is also ruthless when necessary. Carmine's relationship with Tony Soprano is a crucial aspect of the series. While they share a mutual respect, their interactions are often complicated by the tensions and conflicts that arise between the New Jersey and New York factions. Carmine Sr. generally seeks to maintain peace and stability between the two families, but power struggles and disputes over business ventures, such as the Esplanade construction project, often put them at odds. Carmine Sr.'s presence in the series, while not as prominent as some of the other characters, is crucial in depicting the complexities of mafia politics and the delicate balance of power within the criminal underworld. His character represents the old guard of the mafia, with his death symbolizing a shift in the world of organized crime. Sopranos fans often say that season 5 and 6 feel different from the earlier seasons. They're darker, more cynical, and one of the key early moments of season 5's opener is the death of Carmine, as if to signal the end of the old-style Sopranos episodes. The qualities of Carmine, apparently the inventor of the point-shaving scheme according to Bobby, are not necessarily always apparent during his scenes. It's after his part in the show is over, when the likes of Johnny Sack, who used to be a pragmatist, takes over, and then exits through a veil of tears, leading to Phil Leotardo's emotional and petty reign of early man. The Lupertazzis were a competent organization when he was in charge. Perhaps his business-orientated mind is what made him promote the likes of calm, collected family man Johnny Sack. His steadiness and sense of seniority bleeding through the ranks and giving the New York crew a very classy vibe when compared to that pygmy thing in Jersey. As soon as he dies, we see a bloody succession war, instability, with power changing hands every so often, a total debacle. It's a phenomenon that exists in real life too. Often great leaders who achieve much glory, after they go, their successors fail to get anywhere near the heights they achieved. Genghis Khan, Alexander the Great, Suleiman the Magnificent. And notice how, unlike many of the other older characters, Carmine is not in need of tooting his own horn and bigging himself up. It reminds me of a quote from Game of Thrones where Tywin says, "Any man who needs to say, 'I am the king,' is no true king." Carmine was a king, a true boss, a man who towers above all the other bosses, and whose voice is used as an aggregator long after he's dead, like when Phil says,
"Carmine always said the Sopranos are nothing more than a glorified crew."
He's like the Greek in The Wire, business-minded over everything and towering above all the other gangsters. He has all the qualities the likes of Tony, Johnny Sack and Phil Leotardo imagined they had. They talk the talk, but when it came down to it, they allowed personal emotional problems to bleed into their business dealings. What has made Carmine Sr. last this long? What must he have been like in his prime to reach the stage of an old man and still be the most competent boss in the show? The fact that the boss and underboss of New York both plan hits on each other almost simultaneously shows how alert and on the ball one must be in the family of the Lupertazzis. There was class about Carmine, a man who played his cards right and didn't order a hit as a first resort and knew that real gangsters avoided petty squabbles. He stops Johnny Sack killing Ralph, for example, because it was the wrong move for all parties involved. Carmine's first scene is a great way to introduce the character. In the background we have the girls dancing, lesbian shows, whores, disgusting. And while Tony steals a glance every now and again, I'm being kind, he was gawping at them, Carmine never looks across, as does Johnny Sack. Johnny's phone constantly rings, probably Ginny asking if he's bringing a plate over for her, and Carmine simply turns and says,
"Answer the fucking thing."
The fact that this guy, is able to talk as dismissively to Johnny Sack shows how powerful he must be. His talk with Tony is brilliantly written. Carmine reassures Tony, gives him advice, tells him to be a better friend to himself, but he's also telling Tony he's got his number, that he knows everything about him, that he knows he has these spells, that he sees a shrink, something which could get him clipped. As he says, everybody knows. Carmine keeps Tony in check, letting him know he knows his every move, and then gives him a pass on the therapist thing because he values the business relationship between New York and the Sopranos. And after he's always got this no-nonsense attitude on display, where everything is performative, every compliment or comment is him going through the motions, playing the part, everything is a matter of fact. He's been there, done that. His next scene, he's got no interest in the girls.
Alright, let me get the fuck out of here.
And even his thoughts for Junior seem so half-assed.
How's Junior? He's gonna be alright. Tell him he's in our prayers.
He commands an aura of respect through appearances and smart decision-making. Imagine if he did stay while the guys were playing with the ice girls. Imagine one of them bouncing on his wrinkly corpse. The one comment he does go out of the way to make, though, is the classic,
Don doesn't wear shorts.
I think Sopranos fans all know by now this comment was based off something a real mobster told James Gandolfini after watching a scene where Tony cooks in his garden. And after Gandolfini told David Chase, they had it incorporated into the show. It's a classic moment, and they gave the line to the best character they could have given it to, as it encapsulates how low he thinks of Jersey, summed up into a single line. It's pretty funny too. He must have had a lengthy business meeting and leaves it till the last minute to put down Tony with that comment. But I think it was sincere. He was genuinely disgusted and disappointed at the way Tony was carrying himself, the way he is bringing down the idea of a Don, letting the team down. It highlights the differences in class between Jersey and New York yet again, and Carmine says it to Tony with the look of a disappointed father, fitting as he would later say he'd be proud to call Tony a son. He's the only person alive who can make Tony feel like a total idiot kid. There's also another very cool scene early on where Carmine prompts Johnny Sack to tell Tony something, and John lets Tony know that they want money over Tony using inside knowledge from Zellman, who both families share. Tony looks at Carmine, concedes to Johnny that they'll come up with a number, but Carmine doesn't look up once. He doesn't need to. He delegates. He's just so cool. Tony's angry that someone's speaking out of turn, but Carmine isn't angry that Tony hid this incident from him, that he was using Zellman without telling them. His attitude is just, we didn't know, now we do, pay up, end of story. Even where he's sitting, at the head of the table, he looks like a king. You'd never know there were two bosses at this table. He's also sitting facing away from the stairs, when most mobsters would want to sit facing towards the entrance, seeing who comes and goes. He's that high up that he doesn't have to fear from assassins. Then there's the Ginny Sack joke incident. I'm not going to analyse the scene where Johnny Sack asks Carmine to sanction a hit on Ralph and the genius way Carmine deals with John, because I've already done an analysis on this scene. Check it out when you're done with this video. So we'll skip that. But because he can see how much it means to Sack, he does placate him, saying he'll ask for an incredible $200,000 as compensation. But on a personal level, he does not care at all. His disdain for the situation and how trivial this all is to him is on display when he says,
Let's get started. My daughter-in-law's coming in with the baby later.
Like, who says that before an important sit-down? He just wants to be out of there so he can see the grandkids. There's also,
Nobody's getting clipped. You're being unreasonable, John.
And
So either name a price or get the fuck over it.
that last one was like a bullet. Carmine is really fed up by this point, but perhaps in hindsight he could have handled it better, as John would feel ganged up on, like it was 4 versus 1 instead of New York versus New Jersey. He's feeling slighted, backed into a corner, Carmine looking at him when Tony asks John to give up the rat. A boss and underboss are openly disagreeing in front of the pygmy thing. But again, where he sees something is unreasonable, whether it's outside of his family or within it, he'll call it out. His objective is to put a situation to bed, not to gain victory, but to get back to business. The only man in the game who realizes the rules are there in place to ultimately make more money, and that's the main objective. And what happens when John does not budge? He just decides to get rid of him. That is ice cold, ruthless, and the phone call to Tony is legendary.
Problem is, I don't know if John's hearing me.
So what are you gonna do about it?
Me? Nothing.
What does that mean?
I didn't say nothing. We share the Esplanade, Tony. I don't want that apple cart upset.
Yeah, then somebody should do something about it.
I appreciate your thoughts.
You saying what I think you're saying?
I didn't say nothing. All right, then I'll talk to you.
He says what he needs to say without saying it. You'd never catch this guy on a wiretap. True old school mafia behavior. It also is yet another way of putting Tony down. He's fully dressed while Tony is still in bed.
It's me. What, are you still asleep?
These kind of small snide remarks here and there are full of contempt and spread throughout the show from Carmine.
It's an expression, kid.
And then there's the fact that Carmine is getting Tony to do his dirty work in the first place. Shows you what he thinks of him. But there is of course a storyline where it's Carmine himself who is affronted. The issue with him and Tony over the HUD scam. Carmine is in the right but wants a huge cut which Tony turns down. And slowly but surely the shit flinging starts. Carmine doesn't overreact, just scares Vic the appraiser, and when his restaurant is trashed, he calls the union, stopping everyone making money. And eventually it's him, who to all intents and purposes was negotiating from a position of strength, who settled, rather than Tony. He had a stronger family, he was more on the right, and he could have allowed the Esplanade to stay shut for longer as he had other sources of income. But in the interest of business, he settles. I really like the scene where Carmine Sr., Carmine Jr. and Johnny Sack talk at the golf range. It's such a great scene and really deserves its own video. It is in the middle of the HUD issue, no solution in sight, and Tony has gone down to visit Carmine Jr., the first time we've seen him on the show, to get his father to see reason. Little Carmine calls John a greedy motherfucker and questions the advice he gives to his father, the first sign that Johnny Sack and Little Carmine don't see eye to eye, which would eventually explode into a succession war. All three men here have an agenda. Most of Sack's income comes from the Esplanade. He's hurting, so he wants the situation resolved as soon as possible. And he's also Tony's friend. He hates Little Carmine and tried to kill Carmine Sr. Carmine Sr. also wants to settle, but he wants to do it on his terms. Then there's Carmine Jr., whose ego will be bloated that Tony Soprano came to see him to find a solution to this situation. It's a chance for little Carmine to feel important and to prove his worth to his father. Carmine Jr. could probably have never dreamed that Tony Soprano would come to him to resolve the situation involving the two families. But as little Carmine has arrived with Tony's hot air and Sack is desperate for a compromise, this could easily turn into 2 versus 1 with Carmine Sr. backed into a corner.
Anything you could do to change your father's mind?
I'm gonna try, John. I came all the way up here for that.
But Carmine Sr. outwits his son, starting off by undermining him, treating him like a child.
You put your sunblock on?
And then giving Tony a compliment that would be a major blow to Junior, stinging his self-esteem.
Decisive as he is, I would have been proud to call him my own son.
It clearly has an effect as little Carmine starts shit-talking Tony out of resentment and jealousy, and I do wonder if Carmine Sr., the slippery fuck that he is, made that comment on purpose to rile up his son against Tony and essentially get Junior back on his side, rather than it simply being an offhand comment. He knows Tony is trying to use his son as a puppet against him, and saying he wishes Tony was his son enrages little Carmine and sabotages Tony's entire plan. Now it's 2 versus 1 against Johnny Sack, who looks shocked at Junior's comment and sudden change of demeanour.
It's a bit of a poseur, you ask me.
The only reason little Carmine even flew out was to help Tony, and Carmine Sr. throws cold water on it right away, turning Junior against Tony with one single comment. Little Carmine stabs Tony in the back, and Johnny Sack tries and fails to distract everyone with where this conversation is going.
What? What did he say?
His turf, his appraiser.
Son of a bitch.
Would they resod that green?
Carmine was ready for a fight, but it may actually be the case that in a rare instance, it was actually his son who got the better of him and outwitted his father by intentionally mentioning the Sopranos as a family, knowing his father's reaction would be,
Family? I told you. They're a glorified crew.
The smirk on little Carmine's face shows he's played his father here. It's the face of a man who knows he's caused dysentery in the ranks. Johnny Sack tries again by mentioning the longevity of New York's business with the Sopranos, how he's known Tony for many years. But little Carmine is on a roll now, and he's ready for this comment.
On reflection, John, maybe that's the sticking post. Tony feels like you're friends and not business associates.
This sends Carmine Sr. irate, and perhaps him smashing his golf club like a hothouse flower and little Carmine's flinch is a glimpse into how much of a vicious gangster Carmine Sr. may have been in his youth. If he does that as an old man, imagine him as a young man. Senior played Junior, and then Junior played Senior, showing he does have some of his father's cunning. And the scene ends with Johnny no better off, glaring at little Carmine with his Manson lamps and remembering the times when little Carmine would wait in the golf cart. And as far as he's concerned, he should still be there. So everyone's playing politics here, and sure, the Carmine Sr. may have gotten played by his son, but nothing has changed. Senior still wants his 45%, and Tony has lost little Carmine as a backer, thanks to one comment made by Carmine Sr. It's worth mentioning that though he was in the game a long time, and was obviously intelligent, given that he was that old and he was still a boss, but could it be that had he not died when he did, he would have gotten sent down, seeing as though he had a rat in his family who sent down Johnny Sack? It's difficult to say as we don't know how much the feds had on Carmine. As early as season 1, a Fed mentions to Uncle Junior that they want Johnny Sack, Mangano and Teresi. Obviously this is before Carmine Lupertazzi was created as a character, but it suggests they didn't have much on the man. We can talk about this more in another video, but I always found it interesting that in one of Tony's dreams, Carmine Sr. tells him that he's lonely without his wife on the other side, and the implication is that he's trying to evade damnation and punishment. It's a nice way to wrap up the fact that even the best mobster, the bosses of all bosses, is still a criminal at the end of the day, and his destination in the afterlife will be hot and sticky, like my balls. So what do you make of Carmine Sr? Let me know in the comment section below, subscribe to the channel, and thanks for watching.